A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
As governments in Australia and even overseas become bigger and more controlling and more regulating and more demanding, sometimes it's easy as individuals or small communities to be walked over by government decisions which don't meet our needs. So it's important that we push back and voice our opposition at times to achieve justice or fairness or equity for everyone in society. We have one such story today of a lady who is pushing back against a big government decision to close down beds for the elderly in her local hospital. And I'm joined by Liz Nairn now. Liz, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's our pleasure, Liz. Now, as I said in the introduction, you live in a small country town in Western Australia called Boddington. And for years and years and years, there were beds for the elderly in the local hospital, and the Western Australian government decided to close down those beds for the elderly.
Yeah, so basically I've been working there since 1982, so basically for 41, 42 years. We've always had beds for elderly. Because there's no residential aged care facility within 100 kilometres or more, we've always been able to care for our elderly at our hospital. The beds have been allocated as care awaiting placement beds, so technically they were never permanent beds. But because our elderly have nowhere else to go, we've always managed and kept our elderly there until they've passed on. So of late, and I'm not really quite sure what's happened with the WA Health Department, but of late those beds have been closed. So I don't work for WA Country Health anymore. I work in a private practice, but because I hear stories every day of elderly wanting to get sometimes just respite at the hospital or to be cared for whatever reason those beds have been closed. So these people built the hospital in 1957, and as one lady said to me, I cooked the cakes that bought the bricks that built this hospital, and when the time came for her or her husband to get cared for, I'm sorry, but no beds available, you have to go somewhere else. We have elderly people that are going without food to put fuel in their car so that they can do the 300-kilometre round trip to visit their loved one of married husband or wife of 67, 72 years, whatever, going without food to put fuel in their car. And honestly, it's an absolute disgrace that we can't take care of our elderly better than what we're doing.
Yeah, it's very, very sad. So just to repeat for our listeners, so we have a country town, Boddington. How far is Boddington from, say, Perth?
It's probably, give or take, 150 kilometres. So from Woe to Go, it would be nearly a 2-hour trip, maybe an hour and 3/4, depending on traffic. So it's quite a significant way.
Yeah, so it's an hour and a half each way. So Boddington is in the wheat belt region of Western Australia. We have a national audience, Liz, so I'm just trying to paint the picture for our audience. And it's a mixed farming and mining town. You've got two mines on your doorstep, and I'm sure your WA state government gets some very healthy royalties from those mines. One of the biggest gold mines in Australia, actually, and a bauxite mine. It's also a farming area where there's a lot of wheat and crops grown. And what's the population of Boddington?
I think I did have a look a few months ago. It's probably around 1,800, and that's Boddington and districts as well. Yeah. So
it's what we call a small town compared to the big capital cities now. And I think, you know, you've obviously arrived from England. You told me before the interview started you came here in the early 70s, and you know, you'll remember when you first came to Australia, there was a lot more people living in the country in Australia as a percentage of our overall population, but now the majority live in the big cities, and many people would say that most of the state and federal governments now really focus on the big cities because that's where most of the votes are.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Andrew, there's a whole lot of spokes in this wheel. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, lovely for us, we are getting elderly relocating to Boddington to retire. And unfortunately, when they get here, they don't actually realise, there'll be no beds for you when you need it. And that is the tragic reality. I have known people that have completely relocated to this lovely country town, and it's beautiful, But when the time has come for them to need the care, I'm sorry, you've got to go. So that itself is just
so sad because, like you said, a beautiful little town like that, it's probably a lot safer than living in a big city. Things are more accessible. It's easier to get to shops. And if it's nice and flat, which I'm kind of visualising it is fairly flat, they can walk around or ride a bike. So it's an ideal place to retire. And as you said, they get there. And then when they get to the point where they actually need care, the health department of your state is unable to provide them with care simply because they're too old.
That's it. Actually, you've got to move on, and you're actually too high risk. So, unfortunately, I'm not talking about a hospital that's jam-packed with patients. I'm talking about a hospital that has empty beds most of the time. I'm talking about a hospital that the staffing level has not changed. When I first started working at the hospital in 1982, we had a 16-bed hospital, and that was managed extremely well. We had just about everything across the board, including surgery and obstetrics and you name it. Now we are very, very limited as to what we can cope with or what we're allowed to keep at that hospital, which is such a tragedy.
Well, it's, as I said in the introduction, it's another indication of big government, where governments have just become bigger and more, and there's more regulations now, and everything has become more specialised. So, you know, like you said, the downside of that is little areas like where you are don't have the allocated resources because they're just not there. They're all in the big cities.
That's right, exactly. So people whoever made these decisions have probably never even stepped foot in this little country town where we still have the people that have taught and loved. People who nursed 50 years ago can't get care here. So that's the whole tragedy of it.
Well, yeah, and I think for wider society, it's really sad because people, like you said, who worked their whole lives, they've paid taxes their whole lives, they've contributed to Australia. Like the prosperity that we all enjoy now is only because generations before us have worked their backsides off and paid taxes, and our government's had the resources to provide what we just take for granted, which is, you know, roads and hospitals and schools for our kids. And here we are, these people who've worked their whole lives and paid taxes their whole lives and now being denied just simple care. It's very sad, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's on a level of tragic. I mean, when you're elderly for a start, you know, your loved one has to go 100, 300 kilometres away. You might not even drive anymore. So, you can't ever visit them. Or if you do, if you can actually afford to put fuel in the car, we have elderly people that are sleeping in their car where they go and visit their husband or wife 150 kilometres away. They will sleep in their car overnight so that they can see them the next day as well, because they can only put fuel in the car once a fortnight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's on a level of tragic to me, a disgrace, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
Happening in Australia.
And there's even a story behind the hospital that we're talking about, because in 1957, local residents actually raised funds to build that hospital, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. The locals actually fundraised to build the hospital, and those same locals can't get residential care now. And I just think that's totally disgraceful. I really do, on every level.
Yeah, so let's just paint the picture again. So local people build a hospital. Obviously, the WA government got involved and started to provide the staff and the resources. But now that same WA state government is saying, oh, you know what, we're not going to allow beds in this hospital now for the elderly in your town, some of whom actually paid for and helped build that hospital.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Well, you know, Liz, you're a good Christian and you go to the local Baptist church and you're a praying woman. And but let's move on to the positive now. So yourself and others have actually taken some positive steps about this and engaged with all levels of government. Tell us what you're doing, Liz, to try and push this decision back and get it reversed.
Sure. So we started a petition. So we did a paper petition. So that was at the 3 local communities around town and 2 local towns in the district that this is affected as well. And we've also done an online petition. So the online petition raised 1,706 signatures. And the paper petition looks like it's pushing for 1,400. So when I finish collecting all the papers, so we've probably got just a tad over 3,000 signatures. And I don't say that lightly, because I'm saying that because that's probably the majority of people who live in this district. I'd say 99.9% of those people live in this district because they want what we're petitioning for. They want those beds opened as well.
Yeah,
So
well, common sense. Common sense would want those beds open. But so what have you done with those petitions? Who have you engaged with in government?
So we've involved the state Liberal member, Rick Wilson, who's put us in touch with the local Liberal member, Steve Martin. So he presented that to our Legislative Council yesterday in WA Parliament. So that was presented. The online petition was presented yesterday, along with I gave some real life stories that I had permission to do that. So he was able to voice some of those. So I think in a couple of weeks the paper petition will be presented. But just this morning I met with the National member, Mia Davis. So the Nationals are on board as well. So, and they want to be heavily involved with this. This is not a new story. And there has been people that have tried over the years to have certain things happen as well that have just not been heard. But I just feel very strongly at the moment that we are finally getting heard by someone somewhere in all that mismatch of Parliament. I don't understand it all. Couldn't even begin to, but I feel like we're getting at least heard at the moment.
Yeah, which is great. And I think for our listeners, the best thing they can do for you, Liz, and this petition is pray, correct? That the government actually makes a common sense decision here and opens up some beds for the elderly in your town to save them and their relatives having to drive so far just to get looked after.
Absolutely. And would you mind if I just read out 2 scripture verses, Andrew?
We would love you to do that, Liz. We love the Bible on 2020. What do you got for us?
Thank you. Well, I was saying to the Lord a few months ago, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I'm a housewife, I'm a nurse, and that's pretty much where it stops. I have absolutely no idea how Parliament works, how governments work. And I was saying to God, what do you want me to do? What can I do with... I have a lot of local knowledge. I've been in a position that I have heard lots of stories, and I've managed to look after a lot of these people over the years. What do I do with this? And Andrew, before my very eyes, God opened up these scriptures to me, and I was reading through Proverbs, and Proverbs 31:8, and I've read it so many times, but it hit me this particular time. It says, "Open thy mouth for the dumb, in the cause of all such are as appointed to destruction." Verse 9 says, Proverbs 31:9, "Open thy mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy." And honestly, if that wasn't God speaking to me, I don't know, what it was. But we are called to speak for the people that have been silent, who actually can't speak for themselves. And I really, really feel with all my heart that this is what God has asked me to do in this situation, to speak up for the poor and needy and for the dumb, for the people who can't actually be heard. They've got a voice, but no one's listening.
Yeah, amen. Well, that's the nature of big government, unfortunately. Big government gets worse at listening and better at just making decisions without any consultation or without any real, sometimes even transparency. So, Liz, I just want to say well done. You're fighting a good fight here, not for yourself, but for the elderly, for the vulnerable, like you said, the needy. And we just hope and pray, Liz, that you get this decision overturned and you get those beds open in Boddington again. Sounds like a beautiful town. And just for our listeners, Liz is on the land as well. Liz's husband's a farmer, so they're farming. Liz is a nurse. They've contributed to their community their whole working lives, continue to do so. Liz, well done. And I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 today.
You're very welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for letting me have a voice. And I'll get back to you and let you know how it all goes. Please do. Keep in touch. Great stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.